Five, four, three, two, one, zero. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Okay. This meeting is being recorded. Oh my God.
Oh, got me.
Okay. I am good to go.
Good deal. So how are you doing today?
Pretty good. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. It's the weekend, so it's looking good. But yeah, we'll get started. So I guess we'll take it back. I did a little research, and so it sounded like you when you were younger, you were a big Star Trek fan, got even more into Star Wars. But I guess I never saw how you went from that to like, I'm gonna make this shit. I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna do it.
Well, I mean, as I've said in many interviews, it did start with Star Trek when I was a very little kid. And I knew when I grew up I wanted to be on the crew of the Enterprise. And I was just old enough to understand that that wasn't a real thing. But then someone gave me a book called The Making of Star Trek. And I was too young. I didn't read it. But I went to the picture section, and right there is a bunch of 1960s studio technicians working on the bridge of the Enterprise. And something in my little mind clicked and said, I can work on the Enterprise. And so that's the seed. That's where it started. And then I took a TV production class in high school, and I decided to major in film. I went to film school at NYU. I'd been doing some theater in high school. And so that also led into it. And I guess sort of part of it was when Star Wars came out, I wasn't just blown away by the movie as a moviegoer, but also the publicity machine for Star Wars. George Lucas was as much a star of that as any of the actors were. And I'd never really given thought to the person behind the camera, before then. So that sort of pushed me along the road. And then I went to film school and got into it all, and came out to Hollywood with my student film tucked under my arm and said, Mr. Spielberg, I'm here.
He was there, right?
He did not take the call.
Oh, son of a bitch.
But eventually, knocking on enough doors, you start making connections, and one thing leads to another, and you get hired. You get somebody to read your script, and then eventually you get hired to make a film, and then you raise some money and you make an independent film, and somebody notices that, and you move on and you make another and another, and then somebody comes to you and says, we want you to make a movie called Sharknado. And like, what the fuck?
So I mean, well,
that was a very condensed version of a very long journey.
You said you did theater, so were you initially thinking like, and then you saw like the behind the scenes, and you thought about George Lucas. So were you initially like, I'm going to be an actor, and then?
Oh, no. When I say I did theater, I meant I was working on the crew. I was a photographer.
Okay.
I was a sound designer. I was a assistant director. I was a director. I was a technical director. I was a master electrician.
Okay.
One show I spent the whole time hanging from a ladder, hanging light. Tell you, sitting in the lighting booth in a theater gives you a sense of sort of omnipotence, because you're controlling all the lights and the sound, and bring the lights down on people if they're doing something dumb, and you can bring the lights back up. I don't know. It's just fun. I got into theater, I guess, to meet girls.
That's why we do a lot of things in high school. So you were more into the meat and potatoes of like how it's made, and you had a vision of like you wanted to get into I'm guessing sci-fi specifically, or
Yeah, sci-fi, action adventure, those, the fantasy, those have always been my main interests.
very cool. You know, you kind of, you went through that really quick, and you kind of made it sound like it wasn't like, yeah, this is the path, but it's like there's a lot of like business side to things that you had to navigate. That there's probably a lot of creatives out there that would have no chance at figuring that out. You got to pitch it, but you got to have a business plan together. You got to make them see the return on investment. They maybe don't even care about the movie. So, I guess go into that a little bit, and like, because like I said, I think you said it like it wasn't no big deal, but there's a lot that
It was a big
that
deal.
yeah.
I mean that path I just charted out was 20 years.
Mm.
It took 20 years to become an overnight success. So, where do you begin? I mean, you come to LA. Now, mind you, it's probably different today because of the internet. And you can go out, you can use your iPhone, go out and make a film, put it on YouTube, and maybe somebody will see your work. When I was breaking in, you couldn't do that. Because you could shoot something on home video, but it would look like crap, and it would be really hard to get anyone to take it seriously. So that has changed a lot. In a lot of ways, it's a lot easier to get your work seen now. But on the other hand, that also means you're competing with even more people, because back when I was trying to break in, not many people thought of filmmaking or television production as a viable career path. Now, too many people think it's a viable career path. And so there's an overwhelming number of people trying to do it, and there's still only so much, capital to make it done. So you see a lot of people, they'll raise 50, 100 grand, from friends and doctors and dentists in the neighborhood, what have you. And they go out and make their indie film thinking they're going to take it to Sundance and sell it for $10 million and be discovered. And the truth is, they've done exactly the same thing as thousands and thousands of other people are doing at exactly the same time. And just getting your film into Sundance is a massive roll of the dice. The odds of getting a film into Sundance are something like 8,000 to 1, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
And then once you're in Sundance, you have to do well. And the odds of that, how many films are in Sundance, and maybe 2 or 3 of them are going to get decent distribution deals.
Yeah.
So while it's gotten easier to get your work seen, you're also competing against a lot more people. And in theory, it should be easier to network now because of, LinkedIn, and until, a year ago, Twitter, you could start a conversation with somebody.
That's like how I got to talk to you. Facebook just hit
Exactly.
you up, and yeah.
Exactly. Whereas it used to be, you'd have to watch the credits of shows you thought you might be a good match for, or movies where you really admired the work, and figure out who are the people who did this. And then you don't contact Steven Spielberg. You find out who is his director of development. And how do you find that out? Well, there are some industry publications where you can find that, or find out the company, and you just call them up cold and you say, "Hi, can you tell me who your director of development is?" And that worked, in the 90s. I don't know if it still works today. I don't know if they'll tell you that information, but half of these companies have websites, and you can actually go and see who is the director of development, but they won't give you a phone number. So then what? I don't know. It's so with everything that makes it easier, there are equal number of things that make it harder. There used to be, I don't know if there still is, there used to be something called the Hollywood Creative Directory. And you could literally just look up alphabetically every production company in town and see a listing of their staff and figure out, okay, this is the person I need to talk to. And so you would call and just ask for that person, and you would make yourself sound like it was the most commonplace thing in the world, because once you start hemming and hawing, the receptionist isn't even going to put you through. But if you talk to the receptionist like she's just facilitating your call, or he, uh, when I
Act
was
like
breaking
you've
in,
been there
it was
before.
mostly she. Act like you've been there before. Walk in like you own the place until you get to the person you want to talk to. Then be humble, because you don't want to piss them off. But, and you might not even get to the person you want to talk to. You might just get to their assistant, because the assistant kind of has to take the call. And develop a rapport with the assistant. And even if the person you're trying to reach isn't amenable, the truth is, in 5 years, that assistant is probably going to be in that job.
Yeah.
And so then you will have made a contact, and the whole process takes a long time. Or you can be that one in a million shot that makes a low indie film and it gets attention. And the next day you could be directing Godzilla. But the odds of that are so low that you really have to take a more systematic approach if you're trying to break into the business.
Yeah, I feel like you could have something so good that it just doesn't get seen, just doesn't get traction. I mean, it's cool now with video on demand, but the middle of the road, lower budget movies seem to have taken a hit with it, with it going to all like streaming and this and that. A lot of the younger generation coming up, they're getting very good at a lot of these special effects type things
Mhm.
and using these newer programs. And I'm starting to see some like low budget stuff on YouTube. Like one guy I know, Dormini, that does a lot of horror stuff on YouTube. He does it with no budget, and it just looks so good. And he uses a lot of computer stuff for that. Do you think it's gonna shift back to where those lower budget movies are gonna start getting better and getting more in there, or like is it just too hard to get it out there?
Some of them will. As to whether they get seen or not is sort of the because the long-standing trick is you could make an excellent indie film, but if there are no name stars in it, at least outside of the horror genre, it was going to be very difficult to get it seen. And if it's not the kind of film that wins festivals, then it's doubly hard to get it seen. You can make some little personal drama that the festivals will just love, you know, but again, you're competing against thousands of other films. So some of the YouTube stuff is very good. I don't know how no money you can do. I mean, unless you're doing it all in the computer, and it's essentially an animated film. But I mean, one of the big concerns now is, and this has just crept up on all of us in the last year, is going to be AI.
Yeah.
Because now you can make a film that will look like a big budget Hollywood blockbuster, and it'll take 5 seconds. I mean, rendering might take a bit more, but
Yeah.
it might take 5 minutes. And if it doesn't look right, that's okay, because we can make another blockbuster feature film in 5 minutes. So there's going to be a whole new thing about prompt crafting. And that's going to be a new skill. How do you talk to the computer to get the computer to give you what you want? And to me, that's
Interesting.
just the antithesis of how art is supposed to happen. But maybe the new generation that comes up with it will take to it. I mean, I look at movies today and everything is a remake or an adaptation or a sequel or prequel. And I hardly ever go to the movies anymore. I looked up this list the other day and it just stunned me.
I've
I mean,
noticed it's getting more and more. Just everything is a remake, and they want to milk it.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's always been the case that if something were a hit, they would try and milk it. But it used to be that the hit had to come from something original.
Yeah, which
And now you can't get something original made.
I was surprised. Like, so I think I look back at a lot of '90s films, and I really started researching one day, and a lot of things that in '80s and stuff, a lot of things that I thought were original, there was an original in like the 50s or 60s or whatever, and I was just
Well,
like,
that
what the hell?
yeah.
They just
Well,
waited long enough for us to not know.
the other day I went to see Dune, right?
Mm.
And the trailers before Dune were for Twisters and Ghostbusters. And I'm like, I've already seen Twister and Ghostbusters several,
Great
So I
film.
so yeah, exactly. But we're seeing the same movie. There was a Dune in 1984. There was and there was a Ghostbusters in 1984, right? The original
Mhm.
Ghostbusters came out in 1984. So I thought about it. What were the summer movies of 1984? Because this year we're going to get Ghostbusters, we're going to get Godzilla, and one or two other interesting genre movies. And if we're lucky, there'll be 4 or 5 movies that I at least would want to see this summer. And so I looked up this list. What were the summer movies of 1984? Ghostbusters, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Gremlins, Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, The Karate Kid, The Natural, Romancing the Stone, Conan the Destroyer, Red Dawn, Revenge of the Nerds, Police Academy, 16 Candles, The Never-Ending Story, Splash, Footloose, Greystoke, The Legend of Tarzan, Lord of the Apes, The Bounty, The Philadelphia Experiment, Terms of Endearment, and Buckaroo Banzai all came out in one summer.
Damn.
And they've all, become classic movies that are referenced in our pop culture vocabulary.
Yep.
How many movies from the last 5 years are people still going to be talking about 5 years from now, unless they're an ongoing franchise? And how many of those movies weren't original? So Indiana Jones and the
Yeah.
Temple of Doom was a sequel. But when Raiders came out 3 years earlier, that was original. Star Trek III: The Search for Spock doesn't count because it was a franchise. Karate Kid was original. The Natural was original. Romancing the Stone, original. Red Dawn, Revenge of the Nerds, Police Academy, 16 Candles, all original. Never-Ending Story, I think, was based on a book. And
I thought so
obviously,
too.
yeah, and Conan the Destroyer obviously was based on the comic books. Splash was original. Footloose was original. Greystoke obviously was not. The Bounty is a historical thing, but it was an original movie.
Yeah.
Philadelphia Experiment was a remake. I think there'd been a similar
Oh.
movie in the 50s, maybe. I could be wrong about that. Terms of Endearment was original. Buckaroo Banzai was so original that nobody knew what the fuck it was. There's stories about when they were making that. At first, they were getting all sorts of notes from the studio saying, this doesn't make any sense. What the hell are you people doing? And they just kept going. And eventually they stopped getting notes. And they weren't sure if it was because the studio had sort of figured out what they were doing and thought it was cool, or they just stopped paying attention. So there's this famous story that they put a watermelon in the middle of this torture device or something. I forget. I have to watch it again. It's been a while.
Yeah.
But they just randomly stuck a watermelon very prominently in the set. And I think it was Jeff Goldblum's character asks, "What's the watermelon for?" And the other character says, "I'll tell you later." And they just go on by it. And when they didn't get a note about the watermelon, which was completely random and made no sense whatsoever, they figured the execs had just stopped watching, just stopped looking at the dailies. And indeed, from there on, they could basically get away with anything they want. And they ended up with one of the most, original cult movies we've ever seen. I always say that while Jaws was the obvious model for Sharknado,
Okay.
Buckaroo Banzai was my spirit guide in writing,
Really? Okay. I did
because
not know that.
it was just that kind of tongue-in-cheek, play everything straight, but it's really ridiculous kind of feel that was sort of my guiding principle when I was writing it.
I love the feeling of he did not just do that, and then it's like even more than what you thought he was gonna do. Like in Sharknado 1 when he comes through the shark at the end, but then he's got the girl with him
And
on
he's got
top of
Nova,
it,
yeah.
and I was just
It,
like,
it's funny. That was the one conversation that, like, okay, we buy him going through the shark. We're okay with that.
Yeah.
But maybe Nova being in the same shark and pulling her out, maybe that's going too far. And I was like, guys, it's called Sharknado. We can't go too far.
Yes.
And then of course they realized that when the from the response to the first movie. And so every movie after that was pushing me to go further and further. And it really did stray into the absurd as we went along.
So was that fun that they were like, did you feel like unleashed? All right, well, I'm going all the way to the end zone with this. Or did it get stressful or was guys like you're going too far with it?
I mean, both.
Okay.
Both. I mean, we got to have a lot of fun. The second and the third movies, that experience was a lot of fun. By the fourth movie, they were pushing for ridiculous stuff and for pop culture references, just for ridiculous stuff and pop culture references, not, just throw this stuff in, it'll be great. It's like, you don't understand, especially marketing people, they don't understand why a thing worked. They just see that it worked and say, give us more of that.
Yeah.
And sometimes there was a very specific reason why that ridiculous thing was done instead of some other ridiculous thing. And there's more to crafting a silly movie than you realize. It, so many people say it almost writes itself. Well, no, it doesn't. It really doesn't. And if you just get too wacky just for wackiness sake, it's gonna start to fall flat at a certain point. And so when I started getting notes, with pop culture references that I should put in that had nothing to do with the story, they were just, hey, we want to reference this thing. If you're giving me a Jaws reference in a shark movie, okay, we're going to do that.
Yeah.
If we're talking about, Twister, we can put a Twister reference in because we're talking about tornadoes. In the fourth movie, we in the third movie we went into space. In the fourth movie, we had these satellite weapons that would disperse the Sharknadoes. And so we started to stray into sort of Star Wars territory. So I felt, okay, we can do some Star Wars references, but if you want to put in, I'm trying to think of something too absurd to put in Sharknado. Now I'm having trouble. But if you wanted to, since I just mentioned it from 1984, Terms of Endearment, if you want to put a Terms of Endearment reference in Sharknado, it doesn't make sense. And the audience is going to start to feel like you're pushing, like you're running out of natural ideas for the thing. And so that's where it started to get into trouble towards the end, I thought. But I mean, it was a great run while it lasted.
Yeah, it may be an unpopular opinion, but I feel like Thor is a good example of where they got too silly with it and to a point to where it just didn't even fit. And Thor wasn't even really supposed to be that silly. Like it was cool because he was pretty funny at first, but then it just got to where it's like the whole movie they're just shoving it in, and it's like,
Yep.
okay.
The later Thors, I agree with you.
Yeah, the older ones I was down for, but the last couple I was just like.
But you see, it's interesting. They've sort of conditioned us in the last, I don't know, 10 to 20 years to think of movies as just TV series. We're all just waiting for the next Thor movie, the next Avengers movie, the next Star Wars movie. Instead of, as if that's just, well, TV shows come out once every week, movies come out once every 3 years, but they better keep coming out because we're waiting for the next episode. But that's not what movies were supposed to be. That's what TV series are for. Movies should be something different. It should be something that surprises you and makes you want to go to the theater. Because if you make movies into just a TV series, there's no incentive for people to go to the theater. They'll just watch them at home. And that's how we lose an entire art form, I think, and it's happening. So, but we need to teach people how to go back to the theater because so many people are looking at their phones in a movie. I can't remember the last time I went to a movie and somebody didn't spoil it by either looking at their phone or talking on their phone or just having a full volume conversation with the people they're with instead of whispering. I'm like, we should have big instruction signs. This is how you go to the theater.
I I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm terrible with my phone usage and stuff. My wife's really good. She like checks her screen time, hours and things like
Mhm.
that for the week. But it's just like when I go into the theater, I know I'm not gonna be that dick that has the phone going off. Like, don't be that guy, or you're shining your light like
Yeah.
that. And like,
Keep it in your pocket. It's not that hard.
pay money to come watch this movie I want to see. Like, am I
That's
gonna
right.
not watch it? I don't know. It's only gonna get worse because kids these days were like born into it. Like it's been there. And so I mean, the little kids, they want tablets. So whenever they're barely walking, because it looks cool and parents are using it, and so it's probably only gonna get worse. But I still enjoy going to the theater, loading up on a bunch of crap food, and just you
Yeah.
know, like I'll even go by myself sometimes when I'm out of town for work and things like that, just to go. But like, to your point, there's a lot less that comes out that I want to see. Like when I have the opportunity, I look and I'm like, remake, shit, whatever, and but I feel like we're missing a lot of those middle of the road movies that I say middle of the road, like budgetary
Right.
wise,
Yeah,
but
we don't
like,
we don't get mid-range movies anymore. But
yeah,
but but listen to this. Star Trek 3: The Search for Spock,
uh-huh.
Gremlins, and Ghostbusters all came out the same day.
That's
There were three incredible fun movies on the same day. When was the last time we had more than one great movie in a month? I don't know.
I remember in the '90s we had some good runs where I think there's a couple of good things that came out around the same time as Jurassic Park, if I remember right. So things
Hmm.
like that. But like that's the last I remember. I mean, but having three classics like that, bang, 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 same day, I don't know. That's pretty wild.
Yeah. Yeah, those were the days for movies. I think movies may have hit a high point in the 80s. And it went downhill gradually through the 90s, but it wasn't that noticeable. And then around the turn of the century, it just took a precipitous nosedive. And we didn't notice it at first because Lord of the Rings was out. And,
Yeah.
and that was just so extraordinary that it seemed like a great time for movies. But after Lord of the Rings had done, maybe it was The Hobbit. Maybe it was when they decided to make three movies out of The Hobbit when it should have been just one. And that ruined Hollywood. I don't know.
Talking about milking it. I just hope that indie filmmaking really, I don't know, I hope there's some way to kind of just push it more and just get stuff out there. I mean, I do know that people are able to put straight on Amazon, things like that, but the problem is if you don't market it, then it just
Right.
it just gets lost in the
What?
abyss.
Right. And that's why the studios are only doing big budget blockbusters based on previously existing property
Yeah.
because it costs so much to reach the audience now. It used to be, in the 80s when we had all these great movies, all the studio had to do to push their movie was put the same ad in all the major newspapers around the country and put commercials on the three network broadcast networks,
Yeah.
and they would reach 99% of their potential audience. Now you got to advertise, you got to do all that, less so the newspapers, but you still got to put TV commercials on all the networks, plus all the cable channels, plus your own streaming channel,
Mm-hmm.
plus every social media
Spotify,
platform.
whatever.
It's getting a lot harder to reach the audience. They have to spend a lot more. And so now the marketing budgets are basically the same as the production budget. But to reach them, that's for a blockbuster, right? So if you're making a $200 million film, you're going to spend 200 million on marketing. But if you make a $30 million film to reach that same kind of audience, you're still going to have to spend 200 million on marketing.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
right? Because if you only spend 30 million on marketing, you're not going to reach the whole audience. So it's a problem. Admittedly, it is a problem. And you can understand why the studios are doing what they're doing. But at the same time, it's like the snake eating its own tail. Because eventually we're just going to run out. Nobody's going to go to the movies anymore.
Yeah, that's gonna be a sad day for me, is because I've always looked forward to retirement and being able to, like, one day a week I'm going to the theater or whatever. And I'm scared that by the time I do retire that the movie theaters are gonna just go down.
I worry
I
about that too. I mean, so many people I know say I never go to the theater anymore because I can see it at home and nobody will be talking and nobody will be using their phones except me, of course. You know, not me. I mean, that's what the person saying
yeah.
this is, that, they say nobody will be disturbing me by using their phone in the theater, but the truth is that they'll be using their phone at home. But
Yeah.
it's not the same. Seeing a movie at home, no matter how big your TV is not the same. There was a movie I went to see. What was it called? Billy Bob Thornton and Bruce Willis and Kate Blanchett. What was that movie called? Thugs, or I
That's
think it had
newer.
no, it was like 10, 15
Okay.
more. It was like,
Well, I guess Bruce Willis is, yeah, he's not doing well right now.
yeah,
So,
it was
yeah.
like, maybe it was like 20 years ago. Bandits. It was called Bandits.
Okay.
Okay. So there's a moment in Bandits where Billy Bob Thornton is sleeping and he's sort of muttering to himself. And he suddenly sits up and yells, "Beavers and ducks!" And then he falls back down asleep. And the audience burst out laughing at the screening I was at. It was such a non sequitur. It was hilarious. But then for the next 10 minutes, someone in the audience would start laughing at, not at anything
Oh.
in the movie. They would just start laughing, remembering this moment.
Oh.
And you could just hear it sort of popping out all over the audience. It would go back through somebody's mind, and they would laugh again. And then other people would laugh because they were reliving the moment with that person, And it was like
Yeah.
this organic thing. And it changed the perception of that movie. It was an okay movie, but it stuck in my head all these years because of that moment and because of our
Yeah.
communal reaction to it. All the people in that theater that night at that show shared something. We all had the same experience. And when you just watch stuff at home on your own, it's not like that. There was a moment, it was the first Lord of the Rings movie, it was Fellowship of the Rings. And I was sitting in the theater. It was a packed house, and the two people next to me, there was obviously a couple on a date. And the girl, very pretty girl as I recall, was just ragging on the guy for dragging her to this silly kids movie.
Oh.
This is before it starts, right? We're waiting for the movie to start, and she is just tearing into him. What does she want to see this thing about dwarves and midgets and dragons? And this is silliness. And then about 2/3 of the way through the movie, Gandalf has just apparently died. And I look over at this girl, and she's got tears streaming down her
Yes.
face. And that's the kind of thing there's the shared experience, seeing I think about one from my childhood, seeing E.T. for the first time, and I'll
Hmm.
be right here. And you look around and everybody in the theater is crying. You don't get that if you're just watching at home in your living room. It's a
No.
shared communal experience, and it's sort of what holds society together. I used to do this shtick back during the heyday of Sharknado, when I was actually, getting invitations to do public speaking appearances. I would do this shtick about how Sharknado saved the world. Um, and basically my thesis was we were losing the communal experience, right? From the cavemen telling stories around the fire to the ancient Greek plays where everybody would come and see the show, to Shakespeare, performing for the commoners, to say in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, for like 3 generations of people, everybody watched The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson before they went
No.
to bed. If you didn't watch Johnny, you didn't know what people were talking about the next morning.
Hmm.
And for generations, he was an institution, and this was a thing that everybody did, so we could all have the same lexicon, the same vocabulary. We were all talking about the same stuff. It's where the water cooler moment comes from. the series finale of MASH, right?
No.
MASH ends its amazing 11-year run or whatever it is. And more people, that final episode audience had over 100 million Americans watching at the same time, right? There was no VCR, there was no shifting on your
Yep.
DVR, there was no streaming. Everybody in this country, and that number is low because it doesn't account for all the parties that people were having to watch. I had
Yeah.
20 people watching at my house.
No.
That night, for 2.5 hours, everybody in America was doing the same thing. The only shows that have ever rivaled the MASH finale for ratings are Super Bowls.
Dang.
That's it. There are like 10 Super Bowls and MASH. Those are the top ratings, single ratings episodes. And we lost that. Once we had a dozen and then 100 cable channels, and once we had DVRs and VCRs and then on into streaming, with people watching whatever they want, whenever they want. That
Yeah.
sounds like a utopia, but we're not sharing the experience. You can't rush into work the next day and say, hey, did you see that thing last night? Because people say, no, spoiler alert. Don't talk to us about it. We haven't seen it yet. By the
Yeah.
time they see it, you've forgotten about it, and vice versa. And so those water cooler moments, I don't know if we even still, it's been so long since I've worked in an office. I don't know if we even still have water coolers, but we've lost that. And I think the divisiveness in the country, yes, it's cable news and people are in their silos and they're getting
Yeah.
very different facts even. But I think a big part of the divisiveness in this country and in this world is because we have lost our communal vocabulary. We're not all seeing the same stuff at the same time and then talking about it. And I think society is falling apart as a result. And so I used to do this shtick where I'd say, you know, the audience was fractured and nobody was talking to each other and nobody was sharing the same things until one night in 2013 when the most unlikely of suspects came along to save the world in the form of a tornado of sharks. And it was, I mean, what made Sharknado special that night was it was a communal moment. Everybody was on Twitter talking about it, even if they weren't watching the movie. You know, the ratings weren't great for that first showing.
Yeah.
Social media storm was incredible because everybody was talking about it. Everybody was joking about it. And we've lost that. It's hard to achieve that kind of moment anymore. I think last summer, people latched on to Barbenheimer because it was such a ridiculous combination that those two
Yeah.
movies were coming out on the same day. And both of those movies did better at the box office because they were out together.
I thought of that whenever that happened in my head. I was like, we're not going to get anything for a while. So I feel like they dropped all that money and they're like, we're going to make it a this thing. I feel like that was a marketing thing of like, we don't have much for a while because we don't even know when we're going to get to continue more. And so I feel like they made it this huge thing. And I was like, it was such a weird combo. But you know, I don't know. I just felt like it was like purposeful in that
But
way.
it wasn't.
But
It was an
people did come
accident.
together.
They were two different studios putting out those movies. They didn't get together and say, "Hey, let's put out these two very different movies on
Okay.
the same day." That just happened on the schedule. Um, and it was a purely organic thing that people saw posters
Okay.
for Oppenheimer and Barbie and said they're coming out on the same day. That's kind of trippy. I mean, I know I actually had a great experience with that. Not only did I see them both in the same day at theaters across the street from each other, I was in San Diego the day before for the Sharknado 10th anniversary panel.
Cool.
And so within 24 hours, I went from Sharknado to Barbie to Oppenheimer, all within 24 hours. And that I actually drove up from Comic-Con in San Diego to LA to see the movies at my two favorite theaters, which are across the street from each other. So that was a really trippy 24 hours. And then for the 10th anniversary theatrical re-release of Sharknado, they did a mock Barbie poster. You know, with the
How did that
colors.
look?
It was great. It was great. It was really funny. And you know, I always thought it should have been Barbenheimer NATO was basically what they were going for. I could never get that hashtag to fly though, but it was fun. Whatever. But anyhow, yes, society is falling apart, and it's all because we don't have water cooler moments anymore.
That I haven't thought about that, but I mean, that's a good point. We don't have that. For me, it was like military stuff. We all like shared the same experiences, so we talked a
Right.
lot, and we had those moments of that. But nowadays, everybody only kind of gets the content that is like tailored to them, and so everybody's getting different stuff,
Right.
and then you got
And
to
with
sift through everything.
right.
What's
And with
right or
AI,
wrong.
it's going to get even worse because they're
Yeah,
actually going to be able to tailor content to the individual. Eventually, you're going to
yeah,
be able to go on a service, say, hey, I want to see a movie about this, and it should have this element, and it should have this star and this star and this, and it should be in this genre and this kind of thing. And 5 minutes later, you'll be watching a movie that fulfills each of those things. Now, it'll be crap. There'll be nothing interesting or new about it, but it will fulfill your mood at the moment.
like you're
And
describing idiocracy.
I know,
I feel
right?
like that's where we're getting towards.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Exactly. You were in the military?
yeah. I'm on year 19 now. I'm dropping my retirement packet because you drop it a year out. I'm dropping it
Uh-huh.
in June. Yeah,
Wow.
excited for that.
What branch? What did you
Air,
do? What did you do?
Air Force, and so I did security forces for like the first 12 years,
Hmm.
and then I got to a point where I was able to commission, swapped over and I was an intelligence officer and
Oh,
did space and missile stuff for a bit. Now I'm at an air refueling wing kind of thing, so
very cool.
less exciting now,
Yeah.
but good people there for sure. So
Did
yeah.
you see a movie that just came out last month, I guess, called The Land of Bad?
No, I haven't heard of it.
I just saw this movie. I think we got it on pay-per-view or something. Yeah, it went into the theaters and then disappeared really quickly. And it was this cool uh it was this a small Delta Army Delta team trying to rescue somebody. And there were a few incredible just incredibly bad logic problems. You know, just like this was totally unrealistic. That doesn't make sense. But those,
Yeah.
and there was one thing where a helicopter, it was a continuity problem. A helicopter kept changing from a Black Hawk to a Huey, back and forth
Uh,
in the same thing. And it was like real ultra low budget mistakes,
yeah.
kind of things you'd see in an Asylum film where it happened simply because they have no money. I don't know why it happened here because this movie they clearly spent some money on. But outside of those really bad isolated moments, you know, maybe that made up 5 to 10% of the total screen time.
Yeah.
But the other 90% was some really awesome military action. And they really captured the flavor of the, you know, the banter between the soldiers and stuff. And so that's why these bad moments really stuck out because it seemed like the filmmakers had done their research. It seemed
Yeah.
like they knew these people and they knew the mission and they made it feel really realistic, except for these very bad obvious moments. Like there was a B-1 doing a bomb run, and the B-1 came down at almost treetop level. And I'm like, what the fuck? That's not what a B-1
Uh,
does. Um, but they did it. I realize now why they did it, because at the last moment, the B-1 pulls up and doesn't drop the bomb because the heroes are still in the target zone.
oh,
And
so they're giving you that
there's
moment
this
of
real suspense of will the message get through that they're still in there, you know, and the pilot is, or the bombardier, I don't know how that works. The pilot is counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to bomb release. And so then because they had the B2 flying it, but B1 flying in so low, they get to have the shot of our hero, you know, standing there, and the plane, you know, doing this sudden pull up, in the same shot, right? Because we're looking at the
Yeah.
guy and the plane goes vroom and doesn't drop the bomb. Okay, it's a very dramatic shot, but the 5 shots leading up to it, where this, big bomber is flying at treetop level, just took you out of it completely. So it was this very weird
Yeah.
mix of having a great feel for the military action, for the authenticity of it, and just making the action really exciting. The way the director shot it made me very envious, because I
Yeah.
wish I could shoot action that good. But then other times it made no sense at all. It's just an interesting. I'd be curious to see to get the opinion of someone who's actually in the military watching this thing, and telling me if my perceptions are correct, that in fact it felt very authentic, except for some really stupid shit.
Check it out, because
Check it out. Land of Bad.
Land of
I
Bad.
would say check it out.
There's a lot of military movies that are still good, but they screw up so much of it. But the movies where I know the actors took the time to get authenticity piece right, I know the directors, writers, and they did their part, and it's just all comes together. But there's some movies where it's just like little things. Like the big thing that they love to do in movies is they like to rack a weapon, even if it's not a weapon that gets racked. And it's just like,
Right.
don't.
Yep.
And then they do it a million times, and it's like, that part's okay because I get you're trying to get that excitement, but
Yeah. There's always a sound effect.
Yeah.
Someone has a pistol in their hand and they get ready.
Yeah.
And they do a sound of the gun racking, even though there's nothing
Yeah.
mechanical happening in that moment. Yeah, that
Yeah.
drives me nuts. But
So-
as a filmmaker, I understand why you do it, because you need something. It's like the sword being pulled out of the sheath, making that cool sound.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. The odds are, if you're pulling a sword, unless you're in the middle of a battle, you want to be quiet about
Yeah.
it. But that's such a cool sound that it's like, oh yeah, something kick-ass is going to happen. So
Yes.
I sort of see both sides.
Yes, there's those parts I get, so I don't let those bother me, except for like at least make it a gun that can rack. And
Right.
then the other part is when you got like a special operator, his fingers on the trigger everywhere he's going, and he's not got good little discipline, and it's just he didn't train at all for this. But
I remember watching a movie recently. I don't remember what it was, but it was some special ops guys, and this guy had his rifle pointed right at his best friend's head.
Yep.
I'm like,
that's the stuff that kills me. But I know 2 examples I can think of. I know Keanu Reeves and Chris Pratt. They actually went and trained their butts off and got tactical with it. I mean, there's several examples, but those are over the top ones where they were like, it was really good on how they did it. But yeah,
and then of course
appreciated.
all the movies where they get it wrong still have military advisors listed in the credits. I'm like thinking, what were they ignoring these guys, or were the guys not on set that day? What happened?
Which I've been on a set before where I did some stunts on Class of 09, and they gave us these ARs, and all of a sudden I pick it up and the charging handle just drops. And I was like, oh, y'all just pulled the whole bolt carrier out. And I was like, okay, but then that's a problem, because if I have to lift up and all, it's just boop. And so like you just gotta cut that out, I guess. But it throws off the weight and everything, but there's just like a firing pin that you could pull out, and it's just like one little pin, boom, that's it. And I was just like, okay, well, I guess the way
it seems to me a piece of gaffer tape would have solved that problem.
Yeah,
so
or
the
something
thing doesn't
like
fall
that.
out. Yeah.
They're just like, whatever. But and
See,
part of it is we were doing
whatever
body
is
cam.
never an acceptable response on a film set to me. Everything in a movie should be purposeful. I mean, this is why one of the things that has bugged me about making ultra low budget movies, where things are wrong, but you simply don't have the time or money to fix them. And then people call you on those things, and all you can say is, yes, I know, there was no time. I didn't have the money. We used the wrong gun because it was the gun we had. I know it's wrong. So that bugs me, because my philosophy of filmmaking is a filmmaker, in particular a director, but all department heads really on a film, you're creating a reality. You are God. I mean, a filmmaker for that slice of the world, the filmmaker is God. And he's creating, or she is creating, every element of reality. And it's your responsibility to pay attention to it all. There shouldn't be anything in a movie by happenstance.
Yeah.
Everything should be controlled, because that's what movies are. It's truth through fantasy.
And
And
it's not one takes, you got time to,
yeah,
you redo that take and,
yeah,
and fix,
yeah, yeah. So, yeah.
Yes, sorry to bring it back to Sharknado real quick because I haven't really got to ask you much about that. So the one thing that I saw that was interesting, well, I guess two things. First of all, did you know it was going to be such a massive hit? Or what would you think about it going into it, I guess?
Well, one possibility was that it would be the end of my career and I would never work again. That was always a distinct possibility. I hoped what happened would happen, but I certainly couldn't expect it, because when you're doing something that's a little odd, even if you have fun with it, you have no idea if other people will. I mean, I went into the writing of that thinking I'm just going to have fun with this, and I hope other people will too. But I was seriously doubting whether it would work, because there are so many steps, between writing a script and an audience.
Yeah.
And all it takes is for one of those steps to go wrong, and the audience never gets it, or it literally never gets to an audience, or the audience just doesn't get it, right? Because something is off. So where I started to get encouraged was when I saw the poster. And the tagline on the poster was "Enough said." Like Sharknado, enough said. And I realized that our marketing people got it.
Yeah.
We hadn't made this ridiculous tongue-in-cheek thing, and they didn't understand what it was. They got it. They understood what we were doing. And so I started to then get hopeful that it would actually reach the audience the way it was intended to. And then when the first trailer came out, people think that Sharknado just happened spontaneously the night it came out, but that's actually not true. Because there had been buzz building for a couple of weeks. We came out, oh God, you'd think I would remember the date, but I think it was July 12th or 13th, something like that. But on July 5th, I got emails or Facebook messages from several different friends who told me that people were talking about Sharknado at the July 4th parties they were at. I guess because our trailer, was playing on Sci-Fi, and people were just going, "Oh, I gotta see this." So there was buzz building up to it. I actually did a couple of interviews in the weeks leading up to the premiere. I did a great interview for IO9, where they asked me these very faux serious questions, and I gave these very serious, tongue firmly planted in cheek answers. And that interview ended up getting syndicated to a bunch of different outlets. And so that's my small piece of credit that I take, is that I think that interview helped a bit. But yeah, the trailer was out, the commercials were playing on Sci-Fi, and people were starting to talk about it. So there was, by the time it aired, we thought we were going to do well.
Yeah.
In fact, the ratings were lower than we expected, but it was the Twitter reaction that was so phenomenal, and that led to them airing it again, and the ratings went up, and they aired it again, and the ratings went up. And after the ratings went up 2 or 3 times, that's when they decided to do a sequel. So
The second
so yeah, I hoped, but for I had my fears, I had my doubts, but I certainly saw the possibility of people latching onto it. And that was a summer there had been a lot of big budget flops. That was the summer that Lone Ranger came out with Johnny Depp
Yeah.
playing Tonto. And there were a
A
couple
lot
of
of high
others.
hopes for stuff like that too, and it just
Yeah.
didn't. Yeah.
There were a lot of pre-packaged blockbusters, a lot of movies that summer that people sort of felt were being shoved down their throats and being told, this is the big thing of the summer. And then it wasn't because they just sucked. And so I think when Sharknado came along at just the right time for the audience to grab it and say, we have discovered this. This is ours. And I think that helped us a lot too. And it's just a lot of silly fun. And sometimes you just need to have fun.
Well, it was also that, like you said, that water cooler moment. Like, you didn't want to be the one friend that didn't see Sharknado when everybody's talking about it. Then you can't talk to it, and you're just sitting there. And so, yeah, it became that. And then you watch it because in your head, you're like, that sounds ridiculous. But then you watch it and you're just like, this was just absolutely fun, Yeah, it was good for everyone, I think so.
And sometimes I forget how funny it can be when watched with a group. Because the first night I was alone, me and my dog, watching it. There was supposed to be a party. Out here we would get the East Coast feed, and then 3 hours later we'd get the West Coast feed. So we were all watching it on our own when it aired, when we got the East Coast feed 3 hours early. And then we were supposed to have a party, a viewing party for the 8 or 9, whatever it was, showing the West Coast time showing. But what happened was the Twitter blew up during the East Coast broadcast, and I was so busy, tweeting with people and fielding press requests that by the time I got on the road and hit some ungodly traffic, I realized I wasn't going to get to the party until halfway through the screening. And I actually just turned around and came home. And by the time I got home, there were 50 more messages on my voicemail asking me to do interviews. It was really a surreal night. It was the experience of that movie is very different watching it alone or with a group. So when I was watching it that first night, before I really got going on Twitter, I was horrified. It seemed terrible. But then as I was getting into people's reactions, I started to feel better about it. But just recently, just a few years ago, it was like the year before the pandemic, I think. I was invited to talk at a Sharknado screening in Chicago, the Field Museum in Chicago. Their shark expert was hosting a screening of the movie. And then he was going to do a Q&A afterwards about, could this really happen? How accurate is the depiction of sharks, et cetera, et cetera. And I saw the announcement for this, and I contacted them, and I said, how can you do this, without an actual Sharknado expert on hand? And so they invited me to come out, and I had this whole back and forth with their shark expert. And he ended up having to admit, while it wasn't likely, everything that happened in the first movie was at least theoretically possible. And that's all I ask for. But anyhow, the screening beforehand, I usually don't watch because I've seen it so many times. But I was out talking to some people in the lobby or something, and then halfway through I came in, and the laughter, the audience was just laughing all over the place, and I'd forgotten just how funny it can be when you see it with a group of like-minded people. And it just really made me feel good because, we don't get a lot of, it's not like doing live theater. You don't get the instant feedback.
Yeah.
And so seeing that it was really nice.
Yeah, just seeing it all come together, and you did that, and it's a pretty cool thing. Thing about earlier was you should have put like a cameo in, like kind of like Stan Lee does, with each Sharknado, where it's just like
I do.
You did? I didn't see.
I wasn't in the first one, but I'm in 2, 3, and 6.
Okay, dang, I gotta rewatch that then.
Yeah,
that's very, very cool.
And the director, I think, put himself in all of them. So,
did he? Okay.
And there's
I like
also
Easter eggs like that, but it's like
there's
it's
also a stuffed, I don't know if it's a ferret or something like a ferret that was named Petunia, and this stuffed animal appears in every Sharknado movie, just in the background somewhere.
oh, I like it. Okay. All
I don't know
right.
why. I think it was just there on the set during the first movie. Somehow it got there, and he was like, "Hey, we should hang on to that thing. We'll use it again." So that was fun. But yeah, I in the second one, I'm a guy on the. I actually have two cameos in the second one.
Okay.
I'm going down the stairs at City Field when Ian Ziering is running up the stairs and he runs past me. Um,
Oh,
and then I'm in the subway when the sharks attack, and I'm running with a crowd of people in the subway to get away from the sharks. And then in the third
okay.
one, I have an actual character. I play Mr. Benchley from the Post. I'm a reporter. After Finn has gotten the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And I go to ask him a question, and he's like, "Hang on a sec, I got to go talk to this guy." So I get to go.
Okay.
I never actually spoke, but I almost got a line.
Dang, okay.
And then in the sixth one, at the very end in the last scene, we're back in Finn's bar, and we all toast him and we say "Semper Paratus." And I was supposed to get a close up, and the director forgot. So I'm just
Ah,
there. I'm just in there in the crowd, but I'm speaking my own dialogue because I came up with his catchphrase. So it was nice to be able to
there we
actually
go.
deliver the line on camera.
Awesome. Your screenings, do you not like to go to them, or do you like to now have that moment, or is it kind of like you just want that screening to happen and then you kind of hear a little bit later?
No, I like to go to screenings.
You like to film? Yeah.
The first time you see your film with an audience is a whole new experience for you because you've been watching it in pieces, and then you might watch it beginning to end, uh, once, to do a final check.
Yeah.
Um, but mostly you're watching it in pieces. Even when you're doing your sound mix, you're still going back and forth, back and forth. You never really see the whole thing beginning to end with a group of people who've never seen it until you do a test screening.
Yeah.
And that's always a very cool moment. The other cool moment like that as a writer, as a director, well, you've got to be both for this to happen. But as a writer director, the first day of auditions is the first time you actually hear your dialogue spoken out loud.
Yeah.
And that's always a great moment, because it's when it starts to come to life. It's not just in your head anymore. And you start to hear people actually saying your lines and stuff. And it also can be a wake-up call if something isn't working. You can actually
Yeah.
find that out during auditions. And
Yeah.
so those are the two moments for me is uh
Cool.
is the first day of auditions and then the first screening, uh, are special moments.
You've written it, you've read it over, you just been over it so many times where you like question at a certain point of like, well, is this part good? Or because and then you have to be like, I know I like laughed, or I know I like enjoyed this part at that moment. But do you like ever hit a point where you've read it so many times you're like, well, shit, is that still good? Or do you ever question yourself, or is it like
No,
you're in? Okay,
I have ultimate confidence in my own work.
there you
I mean,
go.
every once in a while, I'll write something thinking this isn't working. I'm gonna have to come back and fix it later. Um, but but I usually stop if something's unless I'm on a really tight deadline. I usually
Yeah.
stop when I'm in those moments and I try and figure it out. And if not, I usually have some other writer friends. I have a circle of writer friends
Okay.
who will read my first draft and give me feedback. And if they're all saying this doesn't work and it's the same thing, then I'll take a look at it. But usually I have too much confidence in my own work. And so when a producer starts asking me to change things, I'm like, but you'll ruin it.
Hands off.
And then of course I do make the changes they want because they're signing the check and the
There's
check has
that.
to clear.
But what was cool about your zombie movie is you know, that was your baby and you got to do your own thing. And I get that
Yeah, that's
yeah.
that. And you know, obviously there's more responsibility then because the success of the project is going to live on or die based on whether you were right or not.
Yeah.
You know, and you can't blame anyone else, and you can't get a, I mean, you can get a consensus, but everybody still answers to you. I enjoy working that way. I would like to do all my films that way. But it's a rare opportunity to have that kind of creative control. Usually there's somebody else, you know, the money people or the distribution people or the producers, there's usually somebody else telling you, no, wait a sec.
Yeah. I guess we've been going for a while. We'll end with
Yeah.
this question. From your mind, what is a big project if there's no restrictions or whatever, do you have like a specific genre, or do you have a project you're working on, or do you have like a dream baby that you're
Well,
trying to get going?
those are two different questions.
Yeah.
I have several projects that I'm working on right now that seem viable. A couple of TV series and a couple of feature films. I just had to, I just finally decided to put aside a project that I'd been trying to get going since before the pandemic. There was this indie film called Deadbeard, the Zombie Pirate Musical. And I thought it was the biggest no-brainer in the history of movies. I'm like, this is the next Sharknado. People are going to run out to see this in the theater. They're going to be singing along. It's going to be great. And every executive I showed it to said, "Hey, this is hilarious. I love this. I want to see this movie." But it's not the kind of thing we do. And they all have said exactly the same thing. And nobody will make this movie. And we tried to get private money for it, and we couldn't get anybody to finance it privately. And so finally, I took it to the last three places that I was holding out. I took it to Sam Raimi. I took it to Lord and Miller, you know, who did the Lego movie,
Okay.
and also were producers on Cocaine Bear. And I took it to Seth MacFarlane's company. And I figured if anybody is going to get this, it will be one
Yeah.
of these three people. And they all turned it down. And so I have finally decided that I'm right and everybody else is wrong, and it's just not going to get made right now. So I'm moving on. My next feature project is a horror movie that I'm very excited about. I actually found this script. I didn't write it. I found this first-time writer from Scotland who had written this really cool horror film that had an interesting lead character. It had a shape to it that I'd never really seen before because it starts off feeling like an action adventure movie, like a James Bond movie almost, and then it becomes a horror film, and it's really cool. So I'm working on that right now, and I've got two TV series that I'm pitching, and those are starting to progress through the process, and hopefully we'll come out the other side and get one of them going at least. So those are my practical what's next. I do have a
Okay.
baby. I do have a, in the very late 90s, I wrote this script called 2176. It's a science fiction epic. I thought it was going to be a 4-hour script. It turned into a 6-hour script. So we divided it up into 3 movies. So we were
Okay.
trying to sell people a trilogy that wasn't based on a very popular book or a comic book or game.
Nah.
And so when was it? It was like 2004, I think. It got optioned by Ron Shusett, who did Alien and Total Recall and Minority
Dang.
Report. And he took it out to all the biggest filmmakers in Hollywood. It went to James Cameron, it went to Ridley Scott, it went to Peter Weir. It went to a whole bunch of these big name directors. And the feedback we got from all of them was the same. It's like, this is great, but it's too big, it's too expensive, and nobody is going to pay for it. So that project continues to and it took me 10 years from the time I had the idea until we got to that point.
Yeah.
And so that's my baby. That's the project I hold close to my heart. And if I have another big success where people are saying, "Okay, we'll back your next thing," that's the one I'm
That's
going
gonna
to
be
pull
it.
out. Yeah. And maybe it'll have to be done as a streaming series. I mean, Apple or HBO could probably afford to do this. And then the story that we took 6 to 7 hours to tell in feature form, we could spread out over 7 or 8 years. And there'd be plenty of material because there's a lot of stuff we cut out of this thing.
Yeah.
So that's the thing I hold dear to my heart. And if I ever get to make that, I'll probably retire when I'm done because I'll just be very tired. It's really big.
Yeah, well, if that's been your baby for that long, then yeah, you're gonna put so much into it, and so yeah, I know that makes sense. But that'll be what you hang your hat on then. So
Yeah,
so very cool, man. I appreciate your time today. I won't
bet.
take up any more, but yeah, just thank you for coming on and thank you for giving us those water cooler moments for so long. And
thank you for making them water cooler moments.
yes, sir.
It would not be a hit without the audience. So we always know who pays our salary in the end.
Yeah. Thank you
All
for your
right.
time today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, you have a good one, sir.
Okay.